Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and welcome to my anti-racism nonfiction starter kit recommendations. I have been working hard the last couple of years on my anti-racism in terms of nonfiction, and I have come up with a list here of some really good nonfiction works to get you started on your road to exploring anti-racism and some of these topics. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the nonfiction by kind of subject groups, racism in general, and the intersectionality of racism and feminism, the intersectionality of racism in a historical context, etc., etc., to kind of give you an idea of some topics that you might want to delve into and some books that I think are great places to start with within that topic. This video is for white people and primarily white Americans. If you are serious about wanting to be an anti-racist in your everyday life, I really think you should read some, if not all of these books. With all those caveats out of the way, let's talk about my nonfiction recommendations for anti-racism. The first book I'm going to be talking about is about anti-racism as a concept in general, and that is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. This is one of the foundational texts to me, in my opinion, about how to talk about racism with other people in your life, as well as how to talk about racism internally with yourself and how to interrogate this idea of racism in your own head to really unpack your internal biases and what that looks like for you, and to really try to unravel some of those internal biases. I honestly think this book is like a guide or a how-to to really start the conversation and to start the process of really interrogating yourself, as well as having deep and meaningful conversations of people of your race, as well as people who are of a race that is different from yours, and how to approach those different types of scenarios and conversations. This is hard. This is really hard work, especially if you have a lot of internalized racism. Even if you don't think you do, you do. And we all have a lot of work to do to unpack that and to address it in our everyday lives. So this is step one. This is my Anti-Racism 101 class intro reading material. Next, we're going to talk about like the history of racism and kind of how we got to where we are today, as well as putting some of the things that are happening today in a historical context. So a must read for a great overview of racism in the United States through time since slavery is Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. This is thorough, this is in-depth, this is so well researched and so well put, and I really think it gives you an idea of how policy was enacted to further racist ideologies, which then informed more policy to make the systems that we are trying to fight today. That's what put these systems in place long ago, and even to today. I think this is foundational, this is important, and even though it's like 700 pages, I really think to get the full historical context, this is where to start. For extra credit, if you want to read more into the historical context of racism in America, I highly recommend 400 Souls, edited by Ibram X. Kendi and Keisha Blaine. This is a community history of African America, 1619 to 2019. Now, this is like short vignettes dissecting a particular span of years. This is kind of a form of storytelling. It's a type of self-healing for this community of writers, but this also is a historical narrative about these different snippets in time. So if you're looking for something for extra credit in terms of a historical context to racism, I highly recommend this book. It is one of the best overall and well-crafted projects I have ever read, and I absolutely tabbed the crap out of this. This was really meaningful to me and helped expand my historical context of racism in America even deeper and an even more emotional level. A must-read for Americans, in my opinion, especially recently, is On Juneteenth by Annette Gordon-Reed. This is a pretty short nonfiction, just giving some context around what Juneteenth is. Now, Juneteenth is the day that the last group of slaves were told that they were freed several years after Abraham Lincoln signed the amendment saying that slaves were freed. So there were slave owners who didn't tell the slaves that they were free until years later. And on Juneteenth was the day that the final group of slaves were actually freed. And Juneteenth just recently became a federal holiday, a national holiday in the United States. And I think people need to understand the context of why this is important in terms of getting it the recognition, as well as the context surrounding what the day actually is and what it means to Black folks. I highly recommend this one. It is a quick read, but I think very powerful and very timely, in my opinion. Kind of an extra credit one. I don't think this is a must read, but I do think it is important to recommend it for people who are interested in this topic. But Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. This is the history of medical experimentation and torture on Black individuals since slavery all the way up to today. Now, I'm someone who is really interested in medical history just as a topic, but I think this is particularly good in that it talks about the specific phenomena of white doctors experimenting on Black folks without their consent or fully informed consent, and how through history what that looks like, examples throughout time as to explain why this system is still in place, why Black people aren't treated fairly in the medical industry, why Black women particularly die 4 times the rate of white women in childbirth, those types of things. So if this is a topic that you're interested in today's society, I think you should also understand the historical context around forced experimentation and torture of Black people. So this is a tough read, but I really do think if you're interested in the topic, this is a great place to start. Next, we're going to talk about feminism and the intersectionality of race and feminism, specifically how white feminism and white women harm women of color. So the first book to get you started, I absolutely recommend Hood Feminism, which is subtitled Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot by Mickey Kendall. This is a great introduction to this topic about how feminism and the rise of feminism from the suffragette movement through the 70s really didn't care about Black women, and how that has harmed women, you know, people of color, women of color specifically today, and how their fight is even harder than if they were included in those discussions and in those fights from the beginning. And bouncing off of this, level 2, or the next book you should read after this, is White Tears, Brown Scars, How White Feminism Betrays Women of Color by Ruby Hamad, which is, I'd say, an expansion of the same topic. We're talking about how white women particularly weaponize themselves and their whiteness to harm women of color, whether intentionally or not. And I think that these 2 books together provide a really, not necessarily comprehensive, but a great foundation of knowledge about feminism and how it impacts women of color. Then we have They Were Her Property. White Women as Slave Owners in the American South by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. Sorry, I was reading the full title. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is not only historical, but it is also, I think, a feminist topic that we need to talk about how white women owned slaves in their own right, and how white women were just as complicit and active in the treatment of slaves as their male counterparts. And this was horrifying, this was shocking, but I think we also need to recognize as white women our complacency and our active participation in chattel slavery in order to interrogate our own internal biases today and move past it. We need to accept that we did bad things too, and we continue to do bad things. White woman tears is a leftover from this type of thing, where white women didn't see black people as human either and treated them terribly. So this is kind of a crossover between the history section and the feminism section, in my opinion. Another kind of crossover topic is Mediocre, the Dangerous Legacy of White Male America, also by Ijeoma Oluo. I think this is a really cool work in terms of the scope and the project of this book overall. This is talking about what white male supremacy looks like and the consequences of it through history, and how it affects everyone and harms everyone, including white men, and how toxic and harmful it is to everyone. This confronts some really tough things, but I think it also is a jumping off point or a continuation on the other books I've talked about in terms of feminism, gender, sexism, and how it all ties together, and how racism plays a big part in the toxic masculinity that we as, women, whether we're black or not, deal with today. I also just really enjoy Ijeoma Oluo's writing. I think it's super straightforward and approachable, but so well researched and well written. Extra credit points for reading Becoming by Michelle Obama, which is a memoir written by a black woman, narrated by a black woman, and I think if you're interested in memoir, this is a really great one. I love this memoir and I keep coming back to it. So if you want to support black women in memoir format, read this book. Two kind of offshoot topics that I want to delve into deeper are fat phobia and environmentalism, and how those things relate to racism. So the first book that introduced me to this topic of fat phobia is Fearing the Black Body, Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. And this is, again, a historical context about where fat phobia came from in our society and how it can be directly tied to racism and colonization and chattel slavery. So while, again, not like super fun topics, I think this is a really interesting look at body image and, a lot of those types of things that we're dealing with in America today, and how it really can be traced back to racism. Everything is based on a white supremacist system, truly. The other one I want to talk about is an environmentalism lens when it comes to racism, and the book that I have that introduced me to this topic was A Terrible Thing to Waste, again by Harriet A. Washington. And this is about how companies, governments intentionally pollute black and brown neighborhoods because they don't view those people as human and worthy of safe living conditions, and how it actually directly impacts brain chemistry and intelligence and emotional maturity, and long-term health conditions can spring from that. And I think this was, again, my first kind of introduction into this topic, and something I really want to delve into a lot deeper. But I think both of these books are a good place to start with both of these topics. Those are my nonfiction recommendations, your starter pack for anti-racism work, Hannah's 101 anti-racism class, if you so choose to listen to me. I continue to explore these topics deeply and want to know any of your recommendations for any of these topics down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to read as many as these books as you can and really interrogate your own internal biases for the good of everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye.